The bright lights of Starbase Delta shimmered against the dark space background. John Chen walked through the crowded hallway of the space station, adjusting his blue diplomatic uniform. At 5 feet 8 inches, he wasn't short by Earth standards, but here among the alien species, he often felt tiny. Today was important. Earth had finally joined the Galactic Federation, and John was one of the first human diplomats assigned to the station. He checked his tablet again, reading the meeting details. Ambassador Cathera of the Zenith Empire had requested an emergency meeting. The elevator doors opened into the diplomatic wing. John's steps echoed in the tall hallway designed for much larger species. He had seen pictures of the Zenith people, but nothing prepared him for his first real meeting with one. Ambassador Cathera stood 9 feet tall, her silvery skin catching the light. Her long white hair flowed down her back, and her 4 arms were crossed in what seemed like disapproval. She looked down at John, her purple eyes narrowing. "This is the human diplomat." Cathera's voice boomed through the room. She walked around John, studying him like a curious toy. "I expected someone bigger." John kept his face professional, even as his cheeks turned red. "Size isn't everything, Ambassador. I'm fully qualified to handle any diplomatic matters between our species." Cathera laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "How cute. Your species really thinks they can play in the big leagues." She reached down with one of her 4 arms and patted John's head. "You're barely taller than a Zenith child." Other alien diplomats in the room watched the exchange, some hiding smiles, others looking embarrassed. John took a deep breath. He hadn't trained for years to be treated like this. "Ambassador," John said firmly, stepping away from her hand, "Earth has achieved space travel, solved global warming, and developed quantum computing, all while being small. Perhaps you should judge us by our achievements, not our height." Cathera's eyes flashed with interest. Bold words from such a tiny thing. She sat down at her massive desk, still towering over John even while seated. "Very well. Let's discuss the trade agreement your planet wants so badly." For the next hour, they talked about trade routes and resource sharing. John noticed something interesting. Despite her mocking, Cathera was smart and thorough. She asked tough questions and made good points. If only she could get past her size prejudice. The meeting was going well until Cathera brought up the security arrangements. "Of course, humans will need extra protection in our space. Your fragile little bodies wouldn't survive our normal safety standards." John felt his patience snap. "Ambassador, with all respect, you're letting your bias cloud your judgment. Humans have survived and thrived in some of the harshest conditions. We've climbed mountains higher than your tallest buildings. We've explored ocean depths that would crush most species." Cathera leaned forward, her eyes locked on John. "Is that so? Then perhaps you'd like to prove it." A smile spread across her face, showing perfect white teeth. "I'm organizing the Galactic Diplomatic Challenge next week. Physical and mental tests for all new Federation members. Care to represent Earth? Little human." The room went quiet. The Galactic Diplomatic Challenge was famous for being incredibly difficult. Many species had failed it in the past. Some had even gotten hurt. John stood straight, looking directly into Cathera's purple eyes. "I accept your challenge, Ambassador. Earth will show you what humans can do, regardless of our size." Cathera's laugh filled the room again, but this time it had a different tone. More interested than mocking. "Brave. Foolish, but brave." She stood up, reaching her full height. "1 week, human. Prepare yourself. You'll need it." As John left the diplomatic wing, his heart was racing. He had just committed to something that could make or break Earth's reputation in the Federation. But watching Cathera's surprised face when he stood up to her had been worth it. Looking out a window at the stars, John smiled. He might be small compared to the Zenith, but he would show them that humans had something special. Size wasn't everything. Heart, determination, and intelligence mattered more. The real challenge would begin in 1 week, and John Chen was ready to prove that humans belonged among the stars. The next morning, John walked into the space station's massive training center. His footsteps echoed in the room designed for beings 3 times his size. The message from Cthera had arrived early. First test begins now. Don't be late, tiny one. He found Cthera waiting with 3 other alien diplomats. They stood around a holographic display showing a complex maze of tunnels. Ah, the small human arrives, Cthera announced, her silver skin gleaming under the bright lights. Today's challenge is simple. The station's primary cooling system has failed. The backup systems are overheating in these maintenance tunnels. She pointed at the red sections of the hologram. One of the other diplomats, a rock-skinned giant named Grax, laughed. These tunnels were built for maintenance drones. Even our smallest engineers can't fit. How unfortunate. His rocky features cracked into what might have been a smile. Cthera's purple eyes sparkled with amusement. You have 1 hour to reach all 3 cooling stations and prevent a system failure. The environmental controls will be offline. Temperature will rise to levels that might be uncomfortable for your delicate human body. John studied the hologram carefully. The tunnels were indeed tiny, barely 2 feet wide in some places, but something caught his eye. The path they expected him to take wasn't the only way through. What if I fail? John asked, already removing his diplomatic jacket. Then Earth's application for full trading rights will be reconsidered, Cthera said smoothly. But don't worry, we'll make sure your remains are returned to Earth with full diplomatic honors. John rolled up his sleeves. That's thoughtful of you, Ambassador. But let's save the funeral arrangements for someone else. The maintenance hatch opened with a hiss. Hot air rushed out as John climbed in. The tunnel was cramped, but he could move. Behind him, he heard Cthera's voice. Timer starts now, little human. Try not to cook yourself. The first cooling station was straightforward enough. John crawled through the narrow space, sweat already soaking his shirt. The temperature must have been over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. He reached the panel and quickly rewired the cooling sequence. But it was at the second station that John sought his opportunity. While the aliens watched his heat signature moving through their predetermined route, John spotted a secondary maintenance shaft, one so small that even the repair drones rarely used it. Using his smaller size to his advantage, John squeezed through the tiny shaft. It was a shortcut that would let him reach both remaining stations in half the time. His muscles screamed as he pulled himself through the tight space. But he kept moving. Above, in the control room, Cthera frowned at the monitors. We've lost his signal in section G7. Impossible, Grax rumbled. There's no path through that section. Suddenly, the warning lights for the second cooling station turned green. Before they could react, the third station also came online. The computer announced, cooling systems restored, temperature returning to normal levels. The maintenance hatch opened, and John climbed out. His clothes were soaked with sweat, his face red from the heat, but he was smiling. He'd completed the challenge in just 38 minutes. How? Cthera demanded, all 4 arms crossed. Those routes weren't connected. John wiped his face with his discarded jacket. They weren't connected for someone your size, Ambassador, but being small has its advantages. I found paths your engineers never considered using. Cthera's expression shifted from shock to something else. Curiosity, maybe even respect. Clever, she admitted, but don't celebrate yet, human. This was just the first test. Tomorrow's challenge will require more than just crawling through tiny spaces. Looking forward to it, John replied, standing as tall as he could. By the way, Ambassador, you might want to update your maintenance drone routes. I found at least 3 more shortcuts they could be using. As John walked away, he heard Cthera laugh. Not her usual mocking laugh, but something more genuine. Perhaps, she said to her colleagues, we've underestimated these humans. Grax's rocky face showed concern. He's still too small to be taken seriously. Is he? Cthera watched John leave. Or are we too big to see what's right in front of us? She turned to the others, her voice firm. Prepare the diplomatic simulation for tomorrow. Let's see how that clever mind handles a real crisis. In his quarters that night, John reviewed the station's diplomatic protocols. He knew tomorrow's test would be harder. Kythera wasn't just testing his physical abilities anymore. She was testing everything humans could offer to the Federation. And he was ready to show her that sometimes the biggest surprises came in the smallest packages. The diplomatic simulation chamber was packed with alien officials. John stood before a massive holographic display, showing dozens of spaceships approaching the station. Kythera watched from her raised platform, all four arms clasped behind her back. "Your final test," she announced. "A fleet of refugee ships requests emergency docking. Their life support systems are failing." But she pressed a button, and red warning symbols appeared. "We've detected weapons on their ships. They could be pirates in disguise." John studied the display. "How many people on those ships?" "Over 10,000. Kythera replied. "Including children. But if they're pirates, they could take over the station. Your call, human. You have 5 minutes before their life support fails completely." Suddenly, alarms blared through the station. Not simulation alarms, real ones. "Ambassador," a technician burst into the room. "We have an actual emergency. A cargo ship just crashed into docking bay 7. Hull breach detected." Kythera's purple eyes widened. "End simulation. This is a real crisis." The room erupted in chaos. Larger alien species rushed to evacuate, their heavy footsteps shaking the floor. But John noticed something on the emergency display that everyone else had missed. "Ambassador, wait," he called out. "The crash damaged the emergency force field generators. Regular evacuation protocols won't work." Kythera turned back. "What are you suggesting?" "The maintenance tunnels I used yesterday. They lead to the backup force field controls. But the crash damaged the main corridor. No one your size can reach them now." "And you think you can?" Kythera's voice carried both doubt and hope. "I'm the only one who can fit, but I'll need your help from the control room. We have to work together." For a moment, Kythera stared at him. Then she nodded. "Go. I'll guide you through the station's systems." John sprinted to the maintenance hatch. Inside, emergency lights flashed red. He could hear the groaning of damaged metal all around him. "Turn left at junction K12. Kythera's voice crackled through his communicator. "Warning. Oxygen levels dropping in that section." John crawled faster, ignoring the burning in his lungs. "Talk to me about the force field systems. What am I looking for?" As Kythera explained the technical details, John noticed her voice had changed. Gone was the mocking tone. Now they were just two professionals trying to save lives. He reached the backup controls, but found another problem. "The panel's damaged. I can't reach the upper circuits." "They're too high?" Kythera asked. "No," John grunted, already pulling himself up. "They're too low. This section was built for those maintenance drones again. But I think," he stretched his arm into a tiny gap, "I can just—" The station shuddered violently. John lost his balance, but managed to grab a wire with one hand. His fingers found the circuit he needed. "Ambassador, when I say now, reverse the power flow to section D7. "That's not in any protocol," Kythera protested. "Trust me. The human brain might be small, but it works just fine." A moment of silence. Then, "Ready on your mark, human." John took a deep breath. Now, energy surged through the systems. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then blue force fields flickered to life across the damaged sections. It worked. Kythera's voice carried genuine excitement. "Hull breach contained. Emergency teams are moving in." John slumped against the wall, exhausted but smiling. Not bad for a tiny human, right? When he finally emerged from the maintenance tunnels, Kythera was waiting. She looked at him differently now, not down at him, but at him. "The Federation Council is reviewing the incident," she said. "Your solution was unorthodox. using the drone maintenance systems to create a bypass. Nobody would have thought of that. Sometimes being small lets you see solutions others might miss, John replied. Perhaps, Clara paused. The refugee simulation you were about to solve. What was your answer going to be? John smiled. I was going to suggest letting them dock at empty cargo bays, but using the maintenance tunnels to station security teams nearby. Small enough to stay hidden, but ready to respond. Cathara's expression softened. You're full of surprises, human. She turned to leave, then stopped. Join me for dinner tonight. My quarters. We should discuss your unique perspectives on station security. As she walked away, John noticed she had to duck to get through the door. He grinned, realizing that sometimes the biggest barriers between species weren't physical size. They were the ones in their minds. In his quarters later, preparing for dinner, John wondered what other surprises the evening would bring. One thing was certain. The relationship between humans and the Zenith would never be the same. Cathara's private quarters were enormous, with ceilings that stretched 20 feet high. John felt like he had walked into a giant's castle from an Earth fairy tale. The furniture was all oversized, making him feel even smaller than usual. Please, sit. Cathara gestured to a chair that had been specially adjusted for his size. I had it modified. We can't have you climbing up furniture like one of our children. The fact that she had thought about his comfort surprised John. Thank you, Ambassador. That's thoughtful of you. After today's events, I believe we need to talk. Cathara settled into her own massive chair, her forearms arranging plates of strange-looking food. But first, I should warn you. I've prepared both Zenith and human dishes. The human food was made using Earth recipes from our database. I apologize if it's not perfect. John looked at the plate before him. Among the alien dishes, he recognized something that almost looked like pasta. You cooked Earth food. Attempted to, Cathara said, showing the first signs of uncertainty he'd ever seen from her. Your species has fascinating cuisine, despite your simple cooking tools. As they ate, John noticed Cathara was watching him carefully. Finally, she spoke. Why aren't you afraid of us? The question caught him off guard. Should I be? Most smaller species are. It's why they avoid close contact with the Zenith. Even our allies prefer to communicate through screens. All four of her hands gestured as she spoke. Yet you challenge me directly, crawl through dangerous tunnels, and now sit at my table. John considered his words carefully. On Earth, we have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Cathara's translator took a moment with that one. Then she laughed, not her usual mocking laugh, but something warmer. Your species has strange sayings, but I think I understand. Can I ask you something now? John set down his fork. Why do the Zenith try so hard to intimidate smaller species? The question made Cathara's silver skin shimmer, a sign of emotion. John had learned. Because. She paused, searching for words. Because we were once the ones being intimidated. She stood and walked to a wall display, activating it to show ancient images. 1,000 years ago, the Zenith were half our current size. Another species, long extinct now, ruled our world. They used their greater size to enslave us. John watched as images showed the evolution of her people. You engineered your own evolution. Over generations, Cathara nodded. We modify our genetics, made ourselves bigger, stronger. We swore never to be vulnerable again. She turned to him, all four arms crossed. But then humans arrive. So small, yet completely unafraid. It disturbs many of my people. Because we remind you of your past. Because you make us question our present. Cathara returned to her seat. Today, you saved this station not because of size, but because of... She struggled with the concept. Adaptability, John offered. Humans aren't the strongest, biggest, or fastest. We survive because we adapt, find new solutions, work with others. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. Cthera's communication panel lit up with urgent messages. "Something's wrong," she said, reading the alerts. "Security protocols are being overridden. But that's impossible unless someone small enough to access the maintenance systems is helping larger attackers." John finished her thought. Cthera's eyes narrowed. "The pirates from the refugee simulation. It wasn't just a test. We'd received actual intelligence about an attack." She looked at John. "Someone is using your strategy against us. Then let's use their size against them." John was already moving toward the door. "You know the station's security. I know those maintenance tunnels. Together, Cthera said, standing to her full height, "we might be exactly what this station needs." She grabbed a security weapon with one hand while using another to activate her commander's codes, small and large, working as one. As they hurried out to face the new threat, John realized something had fundamentally changed. Cthera was no longer looking down at him. They were looking forward together, each bringing their unique strengths to the challenge ahead. The station's alarms began to blare, and John could hear heavy footsteps approaching, ready to show them what a human Zenith team can do. Cthera's silver skin glowed with determination. "Lead the way, small one. This time, I mean that as a compliment." The station's emergency lights cast strange shadows as John and Cthera moved through the corridors. Security feeds showed 3 groups of intruders, a mix of large warrior species and smaller technical experts. "They're using our own prejudices against us," Cthera said, checking her weapon. "We were so focused on threats from large species, we never considered small ones dangerous." "Speaking of dangerous," John pointed to a maintenance hatch. "I can get ahead of them through the tunnels. Guide me." Cthera touched her communicator. "Always." But John, one of her hands caught his arm. "Be careful. These intruders won't underestimate you like I did." The maintenance tunnel felt different now. Warmer. John could hear voices above, small aliens speaking in whispers. He activated his silent communicator. "Cthera, I'm right under them. 3 technicians, species I don't recognize. They're wearing Galactic Federation engineering uniforms." "Impossible." Cthera's voice was barely a whisper. "Those credentials are heavily protected unless—" "John, get out of there now. It's a trap." Too late. The section of tunnel beneath John opened, a maintenance trapdoor he hadn't known existed. He fell into a larger chamber, landing hard on his side. "The famous human diplomat," a voice said. John looked up to see a being about his size, but with gray skin and large black eyes. So predictable. "Using the tunnels, just like we planned." Planned. John stood slowly, noting the 6 armed guards, all massive species like the Zenith, surrounding him. "Of course." The gray alien smiled. "We've been watching you, learning how a small species can manipulate the larger ones. Very educational." "Zax." Cthera's voice boomed as she burst through a wall panel, all 4 arms holding weapons. "You treacherous little sandcrawler." "Ambassador Cthera." Zax bowed mockingly. "You're head of station security, at your service." "Well, former head of security now." John's mind raced. "You've been working against the Federation from the inside, using your position to study its weaknesses." "Smart human." Zax nodded. "The Federation preaches equality, but we all know the truth. The large species dominate, while we smaller ones serve. Unless," he gestured around, "unless we prove we're the truly superior ones. Size means nothing when you control the technology." "You're wrong," John said. "Look at Cthera and me. We're proving that size doesn't matter at all. Different species can work together, complement each other's strengths." Zax laughed. "So naive. Cthera only tolerates you because you've proven useful. Once that ends—" He raised a weapon. "Like now." Several things happened at once. The large guards moved to attack Cthera. Zax aimed at John, and the ceiling ventilation shaft burst open. Station security forces rappelled down, a mix of large and small species working in perfect coordination. They'd followed John's signal through the maintenance tunnels. Impossible, Zax shouted. The security teams never work together. They do now, Cthera said, engaging the guards with frightening efficiency. John helped me reorganize them. Large and small, each doing what they do best. John seized his chance, tackling Zax. They rolled across the floor, two small beings fighting while giants battled around them. Zax was stronger, but John had trained in Earth's gravity. Higher than the stations, he used that extra strength to pin Zax down. "It's over," John said as security forces surrounded them. "Your whole plan failed because you couldn't see past your own prejudices, just like I once couldn't see past Cthera's size, and she couldn't see past my smallness." Cthera lifted Zax with one hand. "You'll face Federation justice. All species together will judge your crimes." Later, in the station's medical bay, John let a doctor check his injuries. Cthera ducked through the doorway, carrying something. "A gift," she said, placing a small box beside him. Inside was a badge, silver and black, showing a large and small hand clasped together. "The Federation Council was impressed by how we handled the crisis," she explained. "They're creating a new initiative, the Unity Corps, large and small species working together as equals. They want us to lead it." John picked up the badge. "Us." Cthera smiled. A real smile, not the mocking one she'd once used. "Unless you think I'm too big for the job." "Never," John grinned. "But we might need to redesign some doorways." As they laughed together, news of Zax's plot spread through the station. But with it spread something else. Hope. Species of all sizes were talking, learning from each other, seeing beyond physical differences. Ready to show the galaxy what true unity looks like. Cthera offered one of her hands. John took it, his small hand almost disappearing in hers. "Together," he said. "Big and small." 2 weeks after Zax's arrest, John stood before the Federation Council. 30 representatives from across the galaxy, ranging from tiny floating creatures to beings that filled quarter of the massive chamber. "The Unity Corps proposal is dangerous," boomed Councillor Draz, a mountain-sized being from the warrior Krull species. "Mixing species of different sizes will lead to chaos." "It already has," added High Minister Vix, a small butterfly-like creature. "Look at what happened with Zax. Small species cannot be trusted with power." Cthera stood beside John, her silver skin shimmering with barely controlled anger. But before she could speak, alarms blared through the chamber. "Emergency alert," the station's AI announced. "Quantum drive malfunction detected. Station core destabilizing." Panic erupted. Council members rushed toward exits, but the doors sealed automatically. Emergency protocols. "The core's containment field is failing," Cthera read from her datapad. "Sabotage. Zax's followers left us a parting gift." John studied the emergency schematics floating in the air. "The backup systems. Too damaged," Cthera finished. "And the maintenance tunnels near the core are flooded with radiation. Even you couldn't survive in there." "But what if we didn't work separately?" John pointed to something on the display. "Look, the primary access corridor. It's big enough for you." "The radiation shielding failed there too," Cthera said. "Even my species can't." "But together," John interrupted. "Your body could shield me from radiation, and I could reach the manual override while you hold the emergency doors. We have maybe 2 minutes before the radiation affects even you." The council chamber had gone quiet, all eyes on the human and the zenith. "You'd trust me with your life?" Cthera asked softly. "I already do. Every day." They moved fast. Cthera's silver skin provided natural radiation protection, but it wouldn't last long. John rode on her back as she ran through the access corridor, her 4 arms forcing open emergency doors that would have taken teams of smaller beings to move. At the core section, John could feel the heat even through Cthera's protection. She pressed herself against the wall, creating a small radiation-free space behind her. 1 minute, 40 seconds, she grunted. "Hurry." John squeezed through gaps in the machinery that Kythera's fingers couldn't reach. The override panel was deep inside, past tangles of cables and pulsing energy conduits. 1 minute, Kythera called. Her silver skin was turning gray from radiation exposure. John's fingers found the override switches. They were meant for maintenance drones, spaced perfectly for human hands. But there were 3 of them, spread apart. 30 seconds. John, you have to get out. Almost there. He stretched, reaching the switches. His muscles screamed as he tried to hit all 3 at once. 15 seconds. John, please. With a final effort, John slapped all 3 switches. The core's angry red glow faded to blue. Emergency systems hummed back to life. Kythera collapsed as backup doors slammed shut, protecting them from the remaining radiation. John rushed to her side. Her silver skin had turned almost black. Medical team to core access. He shouted into his communicator. Ambassador down. Did it work? Kythera whispered. Yes, you saved everyone. We saved everyone. Her skin slowly began returning to its normal color. We did it, together. When they returned to the council chamber, supported by medical devices, something had changed. The council members looked at them differently. Perhaps, Councillor Draz rumbled, we were hasty in our judgment. The Unity Core proposal passes, High Minister Vix announced. Unanimously. But it wasn't over. A new alert flashed on screens around the chamber. Reports of ships emerging from hyperspace, an entire fleet. It's the Raxus Confederation. Someone shouted. They're responding to Zax's signal. The Raxus, notorious pirates and outcasts who believed in species purity. They'd been waiting for this chance. Kythera, still weak from radiation, tried to stand. We must. No. John helped her stay seated. You protected me in there. Now it's my turn. He faced the council. The Unity Course isn't just an idea anymore. It's our only chance. Let me show you what humanity can really do. As battle stations sounded throughout the station, John looked at Kythera. She nodded, understanding in her purple eyes. The real test was just beginning. And this time, the whole galaxy would be watching. The Raxus fleet filled the station's view screens. 50 warships, each bristling with weapons. Their hulls bore markings of different species, but all modified to segregate crew by size. Their demands are coming in, a communications officer announced. They want us to surrender all small species crew members. They say mixing species goes against natural law. John stood at the command center, Kythera still recovering beside him. The council members watched as he pulled up the station's schematics. Look familiar? He asked Kythera, pointing to maintenance tunnel layouts. Zax didn't just study these for sabotage. He sent them to the Raxus. They're going to try to take the station the same way he did. Kythera's eyes widened. But if we know their plan, we can use it against them. John turned to the council. I need every species' help. What I'm proposing has never been done before. Hours later, the Raxus launched their attack. Their ships docked forcefully at multiple points, cutting through hull sections. Boarding parties burst in, expecting to face traditional defense forces. Instead, they found empty corridors. Strange. A Raxus commander growled into his communicator. No resistance. Begin Phase 2. Small tech specialists emerged from the Raxus ships, heading for maintenance access points. But when they opened the hatches, they found something impossible. The maintenance tunnels had been modified. Some were wider, some narrower. None matched their intelligence. What is this? The commander demanded. That's when the station's defenders struck. From widened tunnels, Kythera's people emerged, fighting alongside humans in perfectly coordinated attacks. From narrowed passages, small species popped out to disable Raxus weapons, supported by covering fire from larger allies. In the docking bays, butterfly-like council members carried vital intelligence between fighting groups, while giant Krell warriors provided mobile cover. Every species played to its strengths. Impossible. The Raxus commander watched his forces fall into chaos. Species cannot work together like this. Actually, John's voice came over their communications. We can. He was in the station's control center, coordinating with Kythera. You just never tried. The Raxus commander roared in fury. If we can't have the station, no one will. Their ships began charging weapons. Now, Kythera, John shouted. The station's lights dimmed as power diverted to a new system, one they'd installed in secret. Kythera slammed her hand down on the activation panel. Quantum fields flickered to life around each Raxus ship. The technology was based on the station's core, modified by both large and small engineering teams working together. A containment field. The Raxus commander laughed. Our shields will. It's not a containment field, Kythera announced proudly. It's a quantum nullification field. Your weapons are useless. One by one, the Raxus ships went dark. Without weapons, the boarding parties were quickly overwhelmed by the unified station defenders. In the aftermath, John and Kythera stood before the council again. This time, every member rose in respect. The Unity Course is no longer just a proposal, High Minister Vix declared. It is now the foundation of our Federation's future. And its first mission, Counselor Draz added, will be to spread this message across the galaxy, to show others what we learned here. That true strength comes not from size, but from unity. Later, in a quiet moment at their favorite observation deck, John and Kythera watched ships departing, vessels of all sizes, carrying news of their victory to distant worlds. The Raxus commander asked to speak to us, Kythera said. He wanted to know how we did it, how we overcame our differences so completely. John smiled, looking up at his friend. What did you tell him? I said that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. It took a small human to show us the bigger picture. And it took a giant zenith to teach me to stand tall, John added. Kythera laughed, the warm, genuine laugh that had replaced her old mocking one. The galaxy won't be the same after this. Good, John said firmly. It's time for a change. As they watched the stars together, a message flashed on nearby screens, more vessels requesting permission to dock. But these weren't warships or trader vessels. They were ships carrying diplomats, scientists, and explorers from across the galaxy, all coming to learn about the Unity Course. Ready for our next adventure? Kythera asked, offering one of her hands. John took it without hesitation. Together, he said, big and small. Above them, the station's new emblem shone proudly. A large hand and a small one, reaching for the stars as one.